We're learning more about the man accused of brutally attacking a staff member inside Moose Lake's Minnesota sex offender program facility.
A brutal attack inside the Minnesota sex offender program in Moose Lake.
Nicholas Aaron Jones was arrested last night.
That May 1st attack was carried out by Nicholas Aaron Jones, a client inside MSOP. Carlton County court documents say while a staff member was completing rounds, Aaron Jones struck him in the head with a fan motor hidden inside a pillowcase. He then repeatedly hit and kicked the 53-year-old security counselor 8 more times in the head.
The staff member was hospitalized with serious injuries.
That employee suffered serious head trauma and was airlifted to the hospital. Aaron Jones pleaded guilty to attempted murder, and in July, a judge sentenced him to 18 years in prison.
I can't take it. I can't be here.
Our cameras were the only ones in the courtroom when he made chilling statements admitting to the judge he intended to kill the employee that day, and he said he would do it again if given the chance.
Yes, I was meant to kill somebody that day. I apologize that it had to happen to you, but at the end of the day, it'll happen again.
Aaron Jones claims he was mistreated inside the Minnesota sex offender program, and he says murder was his ticket out.
People should look into why are people trying to escape a treatment center to go to prison. That should be alarming.
Dan Wilson is a current client inside the state's sex offender program. He says what happened with Aaron Jones has happened before and will happen again.
The less hope we have, the more the court system doesn't want to pay attention, or the more the public doesn't want to pay attention to the real issues, the less hope we're going to have, and that's a recipe for disaster.
That hopelessness boiling over into violence.
We are learning of yet another assault at the Minnesota sex offender program in Moose Lake.
Just a week after the Aaron Jones attack, MSOP clients attacked 4 other staff members. And Wilson says tensions inside the facility continue to grow.
There's a pattern of clients going to extreme lengths to get out of here and go to prison. Not to go home necessarily. They've given up on that because it's not going to happen. But to go to prison and just be left alone and not abused over and over again.
In 2019, another ruthless attack. MSOP client George Mack Jr. used a razor blade to slash the throat of a clinician. He was sentenced to 20 years for attempted murder and assault. In a letter written to us from the Stillwater prison, Mack writes, "I'm not going to sit there and do life for something I might do. If I'm going to do life, it's going to be because I did something." He goes on to write, "I'd rather die in prison respected and feared than die there as the sexual monster that I know I'm not." The recent unrest and violence inside MSOP has catapulted another look at the controversial program. Clients want the public to take a hard look at MSOP and challenge its effectiveness.
We're not asking for a break. We're asking for people to pay attention to what's happening.
Judge Donovan Frank is tasked with ruling whether MSOP is unconstitutional.
In the past decade, the prison-like treatment center has been under fire after a class action lawsuit was filed by nearly 800 clients inside. They argue the program violates their constitutional rights by handing them pseudo-life sentences after they've already completed their prison terms. And because of its historically low release rate, in 2015, a federal judge agreed and ruled the program unconstitutional. However, Executive Director Nancy Johnston with MSOP says the pathway to release lies on the shoulders of those in the program.
Human change is really up to the individual client. We can't force change. We can give clients the tools to learn about themselves and to hopefully reduce risk to harm. But what they do with those skills and how they apply them and the work that they do and they're willing to do in treatment is really ultimately up to the person.
Minnesota is one of 20 states in the country with civil commitment. In a 2013 MSOP task force report, Minnesota has the highest number per capita of civilly committed sex offenders of any state. According to the Department of Human Services, in its 30 years of operation in Moose Lake, only 21 clients have been fully discharged from the program. Neighboring Wisconsin and Iowa both have civil commitment programs. Both have less than half of the clients compared to Minnesota, yet higher release rates. Wisconsin currently has 191 men civilly committed. About 167 have been released in its lifetime. In Iowa, about 148 men are in its program. 69 patients have successfully left. more than 50% release rates for each state, respectively, compared to Minnesota's release rate of just 3%. Johnston argues Minnesota courts are granting at least 12 to 15 petitions a year.
It is a sophisticated program. It is hard work. It's not something that they're going to change maybe really ingrained behaviors overnight. For many clients, it has taken years.
What is your solution besides abolishing this program? What is your solution to strike that balance of allowing you to have your rights, but also making sure the public feels safe that you guys can be rehabilitated?
That's a difficult question to answer, and it's a good question, and it's a real concern. I think perhaps evaluations from psychiatrists, there's supposed to be psychiatric treatment here, and there's no psychiatrist. Maybe they have the ability to determine who's dangerous and who's not.
In the small town of less than 3,000 people, off of Highway 73 in Moose Lake sits the Minnesota Sex Offender Program, a high-security facility that houses the state's most dangerous sex offenders. It was built in 1995, and one of the first clients to walk in was 62-year-old Daniel Larson.
In the spring of '95, we moved to this building.
So you've been with this building since its creation?
Yes.
Did you think you were going to be in this facility or this program for this long?
No.
Larson was 16 years old when he was civilly committed into the state's sex offender program. According to court documents, in 1976, Larson was accused of raping a 10-year-old girl. The incident reported after he witnessed the murder of his mother and another woman inside a Minneapolis apartment in 1971. After months of going in and out of Minnesota Security Hospital in St. Peter, the courts determined he was mentally ill and ordered his civil commitment.
I had some problems as a kid that I was having trouble dealing with, especially the loss of my mother. And I never got any help from the so-called professionals back then to deal with that as a child.
He and several other clients inside the treatment program agreed to sit down with us and share their stories. Dan Larson and Dan Wilson are some of the men fighting the courts for their release. They claim they're being held not for crimes they have done, but for crimes they might do.
Anyone that wants to claim that Minnesota doesn't have the death penalty, I'd argue with them all day long about that.
Is there a flaw to the foundation or to the understanding that this program was built on the basis that these are offenders that were civilly committing for an indeterminate amount of time based on what they might do, not what they have done?
Even though he hasn't committed possibly a new crime, but the crimes that he did commit and the behavior that he has demonstrated is of great concern.
Nancy Johnston is the executive director of the Minnesota Sex Offender Program. She says the treatment program is state-of-the-art, and the only way out of the program is through a panel of judges.
And our vision is to end sexual violence in Minnesota. I've been here 20 years. I'm very committed to the program.
The Department of Human Services says clients participate in a 3-phase treatment program. According to a 2022 annual report by DHS, the majority of the clients are still in the first phases, phases 1 and 2, with more than 500 clients at their Moose Lake facility. Meantime, less than 50 clients are in the final stage, phase 3, at their St. Peter facility. And about 100 are not participating in treatment at all, including Russell Hatton. He was civilly committed in 2007. After 16 years, he says he's still in phase 1 of the program.
I think it goes back to hopelessness, my experience being in this program for 16 years, and I've seen men who've put in work that the courts and evaluators say they need to do, and it's gotten them nowhere.
They have no intention of ever letting them go home.
Ruby Brewer is a behavioral therapist. She was hired to work for MSOP in 2016. She was a primary therapist for some of the clients inside the program. The former therapist says it didn't take long for her to notice something wasn't right.
When I was working there, I had 2 different supervisors that would force me to lower scores on quarterly and annual treatment reports, because if the scores were too high, then it looked like the clients were doing well, and then they would need to progress, and they did not want them to progress.
When you say force, what do you mean by force?
Either you lower these scores or you're going to get in trouble.
She says when she started to question the program and press her supervisors, DHS launched an investigation. The state agency confirms Brewer was reprimanded for insubordination.
They wanted me out. They were going to make up anything they needed to because they knew I wasn't following what they wanted me to follow.
So I would say that was misinformation.
Brewer resigned after 3 years in 2019.
Why do you take it upon yourself to do this, even though it comes with risks?
I think the biggest piece is because I know how wrong it is. There are individuals, they're in wheelchairs, they use a walker, they're on oxygen, they can barely walk, they can barely stand, and somehow MSOP still convinces people that these are the worst of the worst.
Of the 747 clients inside MSOP, 117 are senior citizens. The oldest client is 89 years old. Committed as a juvenile, Larson has lived the majority of his life behind the walls of this facility.
You're crying now, why?
Well, I miss my mom.
Do you think you're gonna leave here? Or do you think you're gonna end up living the rest of your days here?
Unless I got a miracle, which I doubt. From our governor or the politicians. I'm gonna die here.
In 2011, Larson petitioned for his release. His request was denied. Larson's not alone in feeling that hopelessness. Wilson and Hatton also believe they will live out the remainder of their lives inside MSOP.
We're sorry for the people that we've harmed, not just the victims, but the larger society. There's a lot of shame and guilt and remorse that we have worked through over the years, and through that, we've learned what it means to be a healthier individual and the healthiest versions of ourselves. And we need the opportunity to reintegrate back into society.
I mean, it's just not realistic for me to believe that I'm going to get out any other way, except the body bag.
We've learned what it means to be a healthier individual and the healthiest versions of ourselves. And we need the opportunity to reintegrate back into society.
Russell Hatton has been inside the Minnesota Sex Offender Program for 16 years. He and Dan Wilson agreed to sit down with us. They claim they have participated in treatment but are not moving through the 3-phase program and fear they never will.
I have a sex offense conviction on my record. I went to prison for that for 4 years. That may not have been long enough. Maybe I deserve longer. Then we need to lengthen the criminal sentencing for sex offenders. But to masquerade a prison as a treatment center is the wrong way to do it. It's intellectually dishonest.
The Minnesota Sex Offender Program is a treatment center for mentally ill and sexually dangerous people operated by the Department of Human Services. These are individuals who have already completed their prison terms. Some have no criminal convictions, according to DHS. But rather than placing them under supervised release, counties file petitions to civilly commit them inside MSOP for an indeterminate amount of time.
We know that sex offenders come out of the Department of Corrections all the time. So how does the county attorney decide which ones go into MSOP and which ones get reintegrated back into society under supervised release?
Sure. Under the law, we have to prove that they're a sexually dangerous person. And to prove that, we have to prove, 1, that they've engaged in a course of harmful sexual conduct, 2, that they have a personality disorder, a sexual disorder, or some other mental disorder or dysfunction, and 3, that they're likely to re-engage in that type of harmful sexual conduct.
Kim Mackey is a St. Louis County attorney. Her office has petitioned about 20 cases over the lifespan of the MSOP program. Unlike criminal court, in civil court, these cases are not heard in front of a jury. Rather, it's a judge. But Mackey, who has been practicing law for more than 20 years, says the state still must meet the burden of proof to move a case forward.
One of my utmost concerns is community safety. And when I look at the people who have been committed and those who we seek to commit to the MSOP program, I look at, do we believe as a collective office that this person poses a significant danger to the community? And if so, we need to take some sort of action to protect the community.
According to a study by Williams Institute, the UCLA School of Law, more than 6,300 sex offenders are detained in civil commitment programs across the country. Of the 20 states highlighted in red with civil commitment programs, Minnesota has the highest number per capita of civilly committed sex offenders of any state. Only 21 people have been released in nearly 30 years.
In its time, if the theory is that we're moving people through treatment, we should be seeing those results, but we're not.
You know, some people may say, well, that's because of the particular people who are there. And, and actually this is the program doing its job, keeping them out of the community. But in reality, Minnesota is an outlier.
Eric Janis is president and dean emeritus of the Mitchell-Hamlin School of Law. He has more than 2 decades of legal and scholar experience with a focus on sexual violence prevention. He is currently the director of Sex Litigation and Policy Resource Center. He says even if we accept the premise of what MSOP is, he says Minnesota is operating the program poorly.
Under our American system, if they're convicted of a crime, then they can be sentenced to a sentence that's authorized by law. And that's totally appropriate. That's accountability, retribution, and that's appropriate. No problem with that. Once they have fulfilled that sentence, though, our American Constitution says they cannot be punished anymore. That's called double jeopardy.
More expert witnesses are expected to testify in the coming days and weeks.
Janis was one of nearly 24 people, including judges and lawmakers, selected to be part of the Sex Offender Civil Commitment Task Force in 2013. They were ordered to examine the program when a federal judge ruled it unconstitutional after a class action lawsuit was filed by the clients inside.
One of the things that, if I recall correctly, the task force said was, we need to have a comprehensive approach to sexual violence. What we have now is not a comprehensive approach. We have a single arrow in our quiver, if you will, and that's MSOP.
He says one key finding was too many clients were locked up for too long. However, according to Nancy Johnston, who runs the MSOP program, she says the release rate is based on the client's own effort. Currently, 92 clients are provisionally discharged, meaning they're in transition to less restrictive settings.
There's always room for discussion at the legislature for change in how the law is written, which defines the criteria for release.
DHS says a client can petition for release every 6 months. The current criteria for release must be approved by a special review board and a 3-judge panel. Mackey says it's not an easy process, nor should it be.
So you end up going through a 3-judge panel to be fully discharged. There's a question about whether or not it should be that rigorous on the front end. For someone to go into the program, should they have a 3-judge panel as well?
I believe that there are adequate protections in the law right now for people who are petitioned for commitment.
But Janis argues the way into MSOP should be just as rigorous, with a clear policy of standard to commit someone.
So we could start by clarifying what level of risk we think justifies taking away somebody's liberty like this.
He says the current statute is too vague and can leave room for county attorneys to have different standards of review. Something Johnston agrees with.
With 87 different counties and 87 different judges making those decisions, you end up with a wide range of folks.
Interesting. Yeah. Folks like Wilson and Hatton who say they've served their sentences, but those sentences never meant life behind barbed wire.
We don't want to just shut the program down and let everybody go. We want the proper steps taken so people can receive the help who may be still struggling with things.
I mean, we have overwhelmed the courts with hundreds of lawsuits. And that's not just because we want to be difficult. We want to go home to our families.